Good or bad, we learn so much from our parents. Whether we end up being just like them or the opposite, there's no doubt that our parental interactions shape who we are as adults. In honor of Mother's Day, and this being the first one I celebrate without my mom, I wanted to take the time to share some of the biggest life lessons I've learned from her. In this episode, I'm sharing the most impactful life lessons learned from my mom. I was lucky enough to be blessed with two amazing parents who just happened to leave my life earlier than I would have wanted. Hey there, I'm Raya Reeves, and over a decade ago, I turned my life around through budgeting. I went from being an overspender deep in credit card debt to being the founder and full-time money coach of City Girl Savings. Now, I help women work towards their dream life and tap into their financial power one budget at a time. I fully believe you can live a life you love with a budget, and I'm living proof. The weekly City Girl Savings podcast focuses on the intersection of money and the City Girl lifestyle. Join me every week along with some special guests as I share my experiences, advice, and guidance on navigating life and money as an experience-loving millennial. Now, I think it's best that I start with giving you a little bit of background about who my mom was. She had me a little bit later in life, and so she had an entire life before I even came into the picture. And I think if I can expand on some things, it might give you a better understanding of who she was and why I learned specific things from her. So she was the youngest of three. She was the only girl born in Rochester, New York. Her family was actually from Germany and escaped during the war, which is crazy. But her mom's side of the family migrated to the States during the war. Now, she actually lost her mom at 13 to breast cancer, and then she lost her dad at 15. So she dropped out of high school to work, but ended up getting her GED a little bit later. She started working in insurance at a young age. And, I found out that she would take college classes to just help her grow in her career and get specific credit so that she could work her way up, if you will. She and my uncle used to party a lot. So I don't have specifics. I know they had fun. They have shared some pretty crazy stories. They would travel. My mom loved the beach, by the way. They would travel. They would go out. They literally lived a life. And so, as I mentioned, she's from Rochester. She actually met my dad in Rochester. He is from Rochester, New York, but he was actually living in Dallas, Texas when they met. He was just back in New York visiting his family. All my family is out there. But from what I know about their first meeting, they met at a club and they were dancing the night away. And my dad ended up rubbing her feet at the end of the night. And that is how it all started. So as I mentioned, she had me a little bit later in life. She didn't have me until 35. So like I said, she lived her life, for 34 plus years before I came along. I know that she owned a home in Rochester. She dated, she had boyfriends, she had friends and family, but she did eventually give it all up. I don't think that's the proper term, but she did eventually move to Texas with my dad. They did a road trip together. I remember she was telling me a story that they were at some gas station in like Kentucky or something like that. And my dad is Black, my mom is white. And this was like, late 1980s. And my mom was in the car. My dad was in the gas station. And this man was walking up to the car as my dad was, putting the pump away. And my dad was like, Kathy, that's her name. Kathy, lock the door, lock the door. He got in the car and the guy came up to the door and was like banging on the window. And then they just drove off. So pretty crazy. I don't know what that was. I don't know if this man was racist. I don't know what the deal was. But that was like the only story that either of them, had mentioned to me or my brother about just being an interracial couple. I wish I could have asked more questions or even thought about it, but unfortunately I didn't. So my mom moved to Texas. My parents actually got married in Aspen, Colorado in 1987. And They lived in Austin. They had an apartment before they got their first house, and then I came along. Unfortunately, though, my parents were divorced a few years after I was born. And, my brother is 2.5 years behind me. So it was after him as well. I remember my mom being sad about things, which I'm sure is understandable, but she did what she had to do, which I really, as an adult, respect. So the house that I was born in, her and my dad were both on that loan. And then, she ended up buying her own home, a 2-story. And my brother and I moved in with her. My dad, was still in the picture. If anybody, knows me, they know how close I was with him. So although we were a separated family, there was still a very close dynamic. But, as far as work and stuff goes, like, she continued to grow in her company. She worked her way up to being a supervisor. And in 2016, she ended up taking long-term disability, essentially retiring early, never going back to work. She passed away last August, to COPD, a terrible, terrible disease. But she never complained or had bouts of negativity. I mean, at least from what I saw, I'm sure she had her moments, but she always did her best to put on a brave face for my brother and I, which I really respect about her. There is obviously so much more to my mom's life than just that brief few-minute background, but I think that gives you some insight into who she was as a person. And it transitions me nicely into the first life lesson I learned from her, which was, or is, being independent is a blessing. So when I was growing up, I never saw my mom stress out about much. And if she did, she didn't show it. So like I said, even though she was dying because of a terminal disease, she never complained or had bouts of negativity. Even growing up, I didn't see if she was stressed out about money or work or anything. She didn't really bring that home with her. She worked, she had her own house, her own car. She always made sure that my brother and I were clothed and fed, and she did it all on her own. I know my dad did give child support, but when he died, all of that stopped. So everything that he was doing for her and, for us stopped, and she managed just fine. This is probably one of the biggest lessons I've learned from her, and it's that being independent is such a blessing, especially for a woman, and it's something that is absolutely worth striving for. I never saw my mom struggle to pay bills. I never saw her stress out because she didn't have a man or she was afraid to go places on her own. Like, if she wanted to do something, she did it. If she wanted to go somewhere, she did it. She didn't need anybody to do those things. I think she was the definition of independent. And obviously it's because of what she went through in life before I was even a thought in her mind. I mean, I'm 35 years old and the impact of her loss is tremendous. So I can't imagine being 13 and losing your mom, So life circumstances absolutely forced her to take care of herself on her own. And I think as a result of all of that, she taught me that being an independent woman is such a force to be reckoned with. And I'm so, so grateful for that. The next life lesson I learned from my mom was to stay consistent with your work efforts. So as I mentioned, my mom did not have a college degree or, even a high school diploma for that matter. But in spite of all of that, she was able to work her way up the corporate ladder in workers' compensation insurance. So she started working at Liberty Mutual back when she was living in New York, and she transitioned to another insurance company when she moved to Texas, but she started as a claims adjuster and then ended her career as a supervisor of an entire region in Texas. And she worked Monday through Friday, occasionally on the weekends. Not often she would go in on a Saturday, but sometimes she would. And I remember she would actually pay me to come to the office with her and just organize paperwork. So some Saturdays when I was younger, I would just tag along with her, go to the office and, organize the paperwork that she needed organized, and I would get paid for it. But Monday through Friday, I remember she would be up before all of us. She would brew coffee. She always left around 6:30 in the morning, and she would get home probably around a little before 6 p.m. long days, but she didn't. She never complained. Even when I would call her and ask, what's for dinner? I would do this often. I would call and be like, hey, mom, I'm hungry. What's for dinner? And, me, myself, right now, I don't have kids. I struggle with working and coming home for making dinner for myself every now and then. So I can only imagine, her being in a position where she was working full time. She had 2 kids. She had to come home and think about dinner. And yeah, it just puts a lot into perspective when you're older. But I remember her response would be, well, whatever's in the fridge or leftovers. And I would probably pout, but I totally get it. Another way that she proved that staying consistent with your work efforts is worthwhile is she stayed consistent with her weight loss efforts and was able to lose 80 pounds. Oh, how I wish I was more aware at this time. I was only 13. And if I recall correctly, she had gotten up to 200 pounds. She was only 5'4". So she's a little petite woman. And so she got herself on a diet. She went to some seminar. I remember she had this green juice drink. She got on a workout routine and she lost the weight. And obviously, it didn't happen overnight. I'm learning the older you get, the harder it is to get your body how you want it to be. But she definitely stuck with her work efforts and she saw the results. We all did. And, she never put on weight like that again. My mom has shown me time and time again that being consistent with your work efforts will lead to results. I feel like that is something that has definitely shaped who I am today and the amount of consistent work that I'm willing to put in to get where I want to go. I am very much, a hard worker. I do believe in the value of working hard and staying consistent. I do think that, life can be easy though. So that's a limiting belief or a mindset shift that I'm currently pursuing. I think that we can have a life we love and we don't have to work so hard. But that's not how I grew up. That's not a life lesson that I actually learned from either of my parents. I learned that hard work and staying consistent will get you where you want to go. Are you loving this episode so far? Well, the money and life level up conversations never end in the City Girl Savings community. Visit citygirlsavings.com for instant access to resources that help you budget, level up your money mindset, and so much more. And make sure you stay up to date with CGS by following us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, all at City Girl Savings. The next life lesson I learned from my mom is that there's nothing wrong with being alone. So I mentioned that my parents got divorced. And without getting into too many of those details, it was my dad's actions that led to it. She refused to stay in a relationship where she wasn't valued the way she should have been. And she showed me that as a woman, you don't have to stay with a man. You can be alone and survive and thrive, even if you have kids. So, of course, I would have much rather have preferred a life where my parents were together, but I truly wonder what type of woman I would be today if my mom actually did stay with my dad through all of the disrespectful things that took place. I don't think I would be the person I am today. Now, I will admit that, in my really late teens, early to mid 20s, I definitely had trust issues with men early in those relationships. And it's because of what I saw my dad put my mom through. But me personally, I was always okay with being single, being alone, being by myself. I never needed a relationship. And I think it's because of her that I still am that way. I have a life partner and I absolutely adore him. But if he weren't in the picture, I would also be okay. And it's because of her and what I saw growing up. And, she did everything on her own and it was totally fine, better than fine. So definitely an important part of who I am today. Now, since my mom was, a little bit older when she had me and my brother, and, by the time I was actually aware enough to realize my parents were separated and things like that, she was already financially secure, had a stable career. So I'm sure all of that helped, but she did not hesitate to get out of a situation that would have brought negativity and sadness to her, to the family. And I respect her so much for that. And even after my dad and her like really truly parted ways, she never brought another man into me and my brother's life. Like, I never saw her date anyone else. As I got older, she mentioned that she had actually gone on a few dates, but she never got serious with anyone else. And I remember she said that she had thought about it. She's like, do I want to spend the rest of my life alone? Do I want to be with someone? And she had decided that she didn't want to have to deal with anyone else's drama, and she was happy with where she was at. And so if she's happy, I'm happy. And she also showed me that, hey, you can be just fine being alone. You can be just as happy. You don't need someone in your life to make you a happier individual. The next life lesson I learned from my mom was that being smart with your money is a great thing. So basically, be smart with your money. Growing up, my mom was never afraid to tell my brother and I no if we wanted something. And trust me, we would always ask. We would push the limits. We would test the boundaries. And she would say no. We always had what we needed. So let me make that very clear. We were never without things that we absolutely needed, but there were definitely limits to getting what we wanted. Now, my mom has always been good with money. I wish I could have asked her like where that came from, because she was too young to have learned it from her parents. But I guess, it all came from the fact that she needed to be good with money because she was on her own. But leaving high school to work and take care of yourself would, I'm sure, require basic money management skills to be successful. And I'm sure there was probably a scarcity aspect there too, but who knows? She's not around for me to ask. But my mom had started saving for retirement at the start of her career. So I know I had mentioned that she had worked for Liberty Mutual in New York way before my dad and me and all of that. And so even at that time, she was already contributing to a retirement plan. And when she was, growing in her career, my dad, was active in the stock market. So she had my dad select her investments for her retirement plan very early on. And it paid off because she was able to secure over $1 million in her 401k plan by the time she ended up leaving work for disability. I know I have said this so many times. I know there are a lot of financial experts and influencers who say this all the time, but you truly don't need to make a lot of money to become a millionaire or retire and not have to worry about money, because the earlier you start and the more consistent you are, the more you'll have. And I feel like my mom is truly the perfect example of this. She did not make huge amounts of money. I think when she left work, her salary was under $90,000. So she never even hit six figures in terms of salary, but she was in the workforce for so long, and she was contributing to a retirement plan for so long, and she was invested in the right things that she was able to leave work and have over $1 million in her 401k plan. So anytime I tell you that, start now and stay consistent, like there is a reason behind it. It actually is true and it impacts people. And she is one of those people. You don't need to make a lot of money to become financially independent through just consistent saving and investing. So I know that I was definitely a spender in my college years. And even up until then, I didn't understand the value of money, probably like I should have. I wish my parents would have had more in-depth conversations, because I think they did a lot of things right for themselves, but I don't think they had the tools to communicate it with my brother and I. But as I mentioned, there was a point in my life where I was definitely an overspender, but seeing how she didn't have to worry about money or finances as her health declined, so like later in life, and as her kids left the nest, so to speak. So she never, needed my brother and I to come home and pay her bills. She never worried about not having to be able to pay for her prescriptions as her disease got worse. It just shows me now how important it is to be smart with your money. So this is a life lesson that I've learned from her, but I've learned it later in life, and it's what a game changer. Start saving, start investing. Don't just spend money because you can. You will probably need it in the future. think through your purchases, plan your purchases. It all makes a difference. Now, I still believe like we need to enjoy our life, but it should be done in moderation and it should not be at the expense of our future goals and priorities. The final life lesson I've learned from my mom is that people remember your kindness. If there was one word that I could use to describe my mom, it would be sweet. Like she was just such a sweet person, such a kind person. Like I just like would imagine myself like wrapping her up in my arms and like cradling her because she was just so sweet. But even after she passed, like people had nothing but fond, sweet memories of her and her character. Growing up, like she definitely didn't play games. She wasn't afraid to stand up for what was right, but she was always kind. Like she was always a caring, kind person. And as she got closer to the end of her life, she never complained. She never lost that sweetness, that kind aura, if you will. She never stressed anyone out. She always had a smile on her face. When I was little, like I said, she wouldn't be afraid to raise her voice or, put the discipline on if she needed to. But I just have learned to respect her so much for the character that she had. And she taught me that people will always remember your kindness. They may not remember what you say, but they will definitely remember how you make them feel. And as I remember my mom, I remember her sweet, caring nature, and I just feel so blessed to have witnessed it, to have been a part of that. It's made me a more compassionate person, and it just reminds me to always be kind, always be empathetic to others. We never know what people are going through. So that's the final lesson I've learned from my mom. Thank you so much for letting me share these life lessons that I've learned from her with you. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you take the time to appreciate your mom today, if she's in your life or not. We learn a lot from our parents, whether it's good or bad, but we can always change the narrative and make things better for ourselves and future generations. Thank you so much for letting me be the money coach in your ear today. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the City Girl Savings Podcast and you feel empowered and motivated to take the next step in the journey to your dream life. Remember, if someone like me, a millennial who loves to travel, new experiences, and iced coffees can live a life they love on a budget, you can too.